So, welcome to what is my first professional development seminar. This is a great opportunity. I cannot claim responsibility whatsoever, but thanks for coming. We are in for a special treat today. Whether you're a fan of just leadership, for the many reasons, the many aspects of this gentleman that we've got to speak to us today, there are many things you can learn from him as a leader. There are many things that you can learn from him as a human being. There are many things that you can learn from him about history, World War II, civil rights, overcoming adversity, and as a warrior as well. Sometimes we forget what we as a military are connected to, and it is violence on behalf of our nation. So again, we're blessed with the opportunity to hear from someone who has personally experienced that, who's overcome an amazing amount of adversity and has smiled through it, has endured through it. So thanks for taking advantage of this opportunity. He is going to be with us, I said for an hour, but obviously by the things that he has done, he outranks all of us combined. So Mr. Goldstein, as you choose to do, it's up to you how much time you spend with us. But I said about 45 minutes of talking, and then he'll take some questions at the end, and then whatever time he wants to dedicate to us. So what I would like to do is introduce the guy who's going to introduce Mr. Goldstein, and it's Captain Goldstein.
Thank you, Colonel Gold, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Here's a man who never stops fighting to this very day for the betterment of others and for the causes in which he believes. His efforts only increased after his experiences in World War II. He'll tell you about that. I want to tell you a little bit about the man whom I have known for 30 years. He remained active in the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. He was active in the Refusnik movement, which for those of you who don't know was an effort to expedite refugees and persecuted minorities out of the Soviet Union. And he traveled to Ethiopia in the early 1980s, where he orchestrated a massive humanitarian airlift effort for 50,000 people who were trying to escape that country's oppressive regime. He has incredibly strong values and convictions, a stout heart, and impeccable character. He's the kind of person whom President Franklin D. Roosevelt described in his D-Day prayer, and I quote, "For these men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest. They fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They fight to let justice arise, and tolerance and goodwill. They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home." He inspires me as a husband and father, having demonstrated a beautiful marriage and raising 3 honest, decent, and successful sons. Although he in his modesty would relate, that was my wife's doing. You will soon bear witness to some gripping, harrowing, and true stories from a real hero. I feel humbled to stand in his presence. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and my privilege to introduce to you my grandfather, Mr. Saul Goldstein.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think he was a little biased in what he was saying, but I'll accept it. Let me begin by saying to you that I was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. I attended public schools there, and when I was just about 2 months shy of 18, I enlisted in the United States Army. Why would I do that? I did it because as a young boy going to public schools, my brother and I, who's 18 months younger than me, were exposed to what I called real dirty, filthy types of abuses. We spent days fighting our way back and forth to school. You dirty Jew bastard, you kike, you this, you that. And because we grew up in an area where many of the children who attended school with us were the children of parents who came from Slovakia, Russia, Poland, areas where there was tremendous anti-Semitism. And we were both pretty good shape. He was a real powerhouse, and he was about this tall, and I was always tall, and we would fight at the drop of a pin, and that's what went on. I listened on the radio, I had a little radio, and listened to a priest who spouted vehement anti-Semitism. And I couldn't understand it, a man with a cloth doing that. But anyway, I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back and precipitated my enlisted in the Army. I went out to Camp Crowder, Missouri, and then out to Kansas and joined up with the 1st Division, what was left there, because most of them were in Africa. And we went to England. In England, we continued our training, but the 1st had come back to England from Sicily, and the idea was that they'd be sent back to the United States to train other troops, because they were actually the first American troops to see combat in the European theater. Most of our training in England consisted of getting on and off of landing craft. Now that may sound funny to you, but what would be so difficult about getting on and off a landing craft? You've all heard the name, the Higgins boat. It's a flat bottom little craft. It carried 35, 40, 50 people, and you could put more in if you jammed them up. And we would get aboard a ship, and there were no gangways or anything like that. Instead, they had cargo nets that they dropped alongside the ship, and you worked your way down, clinging to this net until you got near the boat. And if you were lucky, because we did lose some people, and the boat was in the right kind of wave and you dropped into the boat, just let go and fell into the boat. Hopefully some of your friends would catch you and help you into the boat. But you're carrying full pack, sometimes 120 pounds, 140 pounds, depending on what you were doing. If you're a BAR man, you're carrying a Browning automatic rifle, sometimes some ammo along with your assistant. And I fortunately was a non-com, so I carried a carbine and a lot of ammo and grenades and what have you. And luckily, I never missed getting into the boat. We did lose some people who didn't, and they went down the water, and there was no way to get them up. And there was no way to dislodge yourself from the weight you were carrying. And one day, they told us, get ready, you're going to be moving out. So we all packed up all our gear, got on 6x, 6 trucks, and went on down to southern England. And there was the most amazing thing we had ever seen. There were piles of boxes and cases of ammunition, K-rations, everything you could think of piled like a mile high. There were tanks just on top of each other, trucks, anything you can think of was stored there, plus 1 million troops. And we were penned in, MPs were everywhere, and you weren't allowed to move or go anywhere outside a certain perimeter. And one day, we were told, get ready to board ship. This was in June. We all got our packs ready, got everything ready, moved out and boarded the ship. That was on June 4th. And the weather was so bad that the ship came back to port. We were probably a couple of miles out, came back to port, and we sat there for another day, sick as dogs, people throwing up over top of each other. I was lucky I had a bunk on the 6th bunk at the top. I made sure of that. So if I threw up, the other guys got it. So and I was sick. One thing I'll never forget, and I'll never understand, but in the military, I guess there are certain things you don't understand. They served us breakfast. The breakfast was hot dogs and beans. Now, why in the hell would they serve us that for breakfast and put us on these ships? But you know, they said that there were so many ships in that English Channel that you could walk from England to France and never get your feet wet. Well, it was a story, but there were that many ships. The sound of planes in the air was deafening. There were you named the type of plane, it was in the air. You named the type of ship, it was in the water. And finally, the next day we took off, and at 7:15, 7:30 that morning, June 6th, we could see the coast of France, and the heavy artillery from those gun emplacements was whamping toward us, and we were lucky. Because first of all, we were about a mile off course. We're a mile north of where we should have landed, on Omaha Beach, and Utah Beach was on the right. On our right flank was the 29th Division from the Maryland, Pennsylvania area. On our left flank was the British Army, Canadian, and Free French. We spearheaded the movement into Omaha. As we approached the beaches, we got terrific fire, tremendous fire from fortifications on the beach. And then we got lucky. And a destroyer or cruiser, I don't know what it was, beached itself, lowered its guns, and started firing as though we were firing a rifle or something. But they knocked out the fortification on the left-hand side. I've never been back to Normandy in all these years, and there's a reason. But people who have been there say they saw that fortification, how it was all blasted, as opposed to one on the right. And I think that we saved some lives because of that. But we did lose 16,000 people the first day. I lost 40% of my platoon before we had got anywhere near clearing the beach. It wasn't just gunfire, it was, the mines were all over the place. As strange as it may sound, if a mine went off, you were sort of thinking, oh, thank God it wasn't me, and then you walked where that person had been killed, because you knew that that mine no longer existed. And it may sound cruel, it may sound terrible, but that's what went through your mind. In the water, you're getting there, and all of a sudden something washes up alongside of you, and it's half of a person, or a person's head, or legs, or just a body that's completely unrecognizable. You kept moving for a number of reasons. One, you had to keep moving. It's your duty, it's what you're supposed to do. Two, you're scared to death that if you stay put, you're going to drown or get hit. And thirdly, you didn't want your fellow soldiers to see you in that state of mind. Well, as a non-com, I had to make sure that my people kept moving out. It took us probably the better part of 3 or 4 hours to get anywhere near the edge of the beach. And we finally cleared the beach. We got up into the hedgerows, fought our way through the hedgerows, and I will tell you that we had some problems up there, especially with all due respects to you first, second lieutenants. Every time I'd send back for ammo or provisions, I'd send back for a second lieutenant. Not that they were stupid or anything, far from it, but some of them just didn't listen. And they'd come up and they'd say, do you have an observation post? Yes, sir. Where is it? At the end of this hedgerow, but stay on this side of the hedgerow. And some would go up. I remember distinctly one fella, he had been at West Point, he came, he was all gung-ho, and he says, I know what's going on there. I said, sir, please don't cross over into the head of the hedgerow. Stay in line with this hedgerow. He didn't, and we found his body and sent back for another lieutenant. For many, many days, I ran the company, actually, because we kept losing officers right and left. After we cleared the hedgerows and moved in, we went into St. Marie Église, where the 101st and the 82nd had taken it, and we finished it for them. And then we went to Coutances, Carentan, and fought with the British up toward Holland. And as we got closer to Holland, the British were penned in. They couldn't get tanks across the bridges, and the American, the 101st, I think the 101st or the 82nd, dropped people there to help them. It was during that time that a German officer was killed, and I looked at him and I saw he was carrying a Beretta, and I took it and I put it in my waistband. And also, I took a knife from a paratrooper who had been killed, and I took that and I kept that with me. And every day when I get a chance to sit by myself or something, I would hone that on a stone until it was so sharp I could literally shave with it. Why I did it, I don't know, whether it was just nerves or just whatever reason was, I kept that knife. And the gun, I picked up another one until one day my colonel said to me, "Why are you collecting these guns?" I said, "I only have 2 of them." He said, "And if they capture you, they're going to shoot you, or you're going to be sent to one of those places." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Because they'll know they came from a German officer that you killed." So I said, "Oh, really?" "Yeah." So when he turned away, I took both guns and threw them away. And I didn't want to be a part of that. Anyway, we cleared Holland. We moved into Belgium. And that was a great snow, horrible winter, when the Battle of the Bulge. And they sent us up to a place called the Hurtgen Forest. And the Hurtgen Forest was just terrible, miserable place. The Germans used the forest as a weapon. For example, their heavy artillery would fire into the forest, tearing those trees to shreds, and pieces of trees about the size of this microphone or larger, if it hit you, it would just tear you apart, just rip your body apart, because it was like a piece of shrapnel. And I know because I have a piece of my right leg. And we lost a lot of people there. To this day, I don't know why it was so important to take the Hurtgen Forest. I've read a lot. I've gone back over the history of the first, and I still don't know why it was somebody's idea to take the Hurtgen Forest. And then we came back into the Bastogne area, and it was there with all the snow, and we weren't dressed properly. We didn't have the kind of, we were all had our same uniforms that we wore on an invasion, and we stood out like a piece of coal in the snow. So what we would do is we'd go into restaurants and the houses and take sheets off of the beds and off the tablecloths and so forth that were white, and we would wrap those around us. And so we could sort of blend in, but that didn't help too much. But I had told my men before, I mean, I guess I was thinking in the right direction. I said, I want every one of you to get an extra pair or 2 of socks. And if you can get an extra pair of gloves. Where are you going to put these things, Sergeant? I said, I'll tell you what, take the socks and put them between your hard hat and your plastic hat. As you know, you have a steel hat and you have a plastic under it. Put it in between there. Take the gloves and stick them in your pocket or anywhere. You're going to need them. I had 3 people out of my company sent back because of frostbite, toes or fingers, nobody else. Many of the companies lost dozens of people, had toes amputated, fingers amputated, but because I told them, and therefore they had dry socks and dry gloves, they were able to do that and then prevent them from getting their toes cut off or fingers. As a matter of fact, later on somebody said to me, you know, I would be willing to give up some toes if I could have gone home. And I said, well, that wasn't your decision. So after the Bulge, we moved across the Siegfried Line into Germany proper. It was there in the town of Aachen, Germany, the first German city we had hit, in Germany, and we had a hard time there. It took us about 3 or 4 weeks to take that town. First of all, they had their people in church steeples and high buildings. They had tanks sunk in the cellars. In other words, they'd blast the house away. They'd drop that Panther tank in there just so the gun would be able to swivel around. And it was a bad scene. We were walking down the street, and that's when we started calling it the bowling alley, because I sent back and had as many grenades, pineapple grenades, sent up as we could get. And I had all my people, as we went down the streets, we would throw them in the windows of stores, houses, whatever was there, we didn't care. Just throw them. We never asked whether they were men, women, children, dogs, cats, or what. We just threw them in the windows. My whole purpose was to make sure that nobody would be behind us as we moved through this town. But we were getting a lot of fire from, and we were told, by the way, try not to destroy housing objects that may be of historic value. Could you believe that? And here, at top of this church or cathedral or something, are German snipers. So what we did was just call up some tanks or something, and if we could, and just blast them away. We'd take 50s or Brownings and just blast the top of that steeple away. And nobody paid any attention to the orders that we'd been given, because it didn't make any sense to us. And I always felt that if an order didn't make any sense to me, and I'd lose people because of it, I wasn't going to obey it. And so throughout, I was pretty lucky in that I never really ran into a problem. And I happened to be lucky again in that I had a Colonel Pednault, who was a real buddy of mine, even though there was such a difference in rank, and he trusted me implicitly and I trusted him implicitly. So that if he'd tell me something to do, I would do it. If I said to him, sir, we can't do that, he'd say, okay. No other way? I said, no other way. He said, okay, do what you think's best. And that's the relationship we had. So I bypassed captains and majors and so forth and so on, and I dealt strictly with him. I was his buddy, I was his right arm, and vice versa. And so we got things done. Well, after we cleared Aachen, Germany, we moved into Germany proper. We got up to the Remagen, and we fought our way through Germany. We got up near the area near Weisborn, and one of the colonel said to me, I don't know what's going on out there. You better take a recon unit and see. Because believe it or not, we had radios, but some of those radios from World War I, you had to grind them up to get enough power in them, and they weren't even working. So we would send out recon units. Now, I took 7 men. I took a half-track, and you all know what a half-track is, and a Jeep, and I mounted a 50 caliber machine gun on a half-track in case we ran into any kind of aircraft. I felt that would be defensive enough. On the Jeep, I mounted a 30 caliber machine gun, and we took off. The whole purpose of the recon was the 3rd Army under General Patton was coming up from the south. We were coming up from the northeast, and we were going to be a pincer movement where we were going to encircle probably 125,000 German soldiers if we could complete the pincer. So we moved out, and the first day we stayed out in the woods. The second day we moved closer into the wood, deeper in the woods, and then came out onto a nice road. And as we bored to the left, one of my people said, what's that smell? And I said, I don't know, but I smell it too. So as we moved, on the right-hand side, we saw this chimney about 30, 40 feet high, red brick chimney, and white smoke billowing out the top of it. And the smell was so intense that we actually took out handkerchiefs or whatever we had and held them over our mouth and our nose because the smell was so terrible. And we couldn't figure out what it was. And as we made a left turn in that road and came up a hill, I could see this fence. I took my glasses and I could see this huge fence. It was 3 actually, with barbed wire on top and what have you. And there were gun emplacements like every 75 yards or so. And I turned and I could see movement behind it. So I turned to one of my corporals and I said, you know, I think this is a prisoner of war camp, and maybe we can get these guys out of there. So he looks at me, he said, Sergeant, there's only 8 of us, and counting you. How are we going to do this? And I said, well, can't you hear the boom? I said, the third's coming. I can hear the sound of the guns. And so if you kept real quiet and there was no noise or anything else, you could almost hear the sound of tanks. And I said, they've got to be a day behind. They're going to be here in at least a day. So we'll be all right. So as we got closer to this fence, I handed my glasses to my corporal and I said, tell me what you see. So he looked through me, he says, they're not prisoners of war. I said, how do you know? He said, well, I can see the way they're clothed. And we didn't know what it was. And as we got closer, we had to decide what to do. And one of my men said, it looks like a gate or something way down there about 1 kilometer away. You could just barely see it. Through my glasses, I could see it was a gate. I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going through the fence. So I put the half track in front, lowered our guns, and we plowed right through the fencing, all 3 fences. And as we jumped down off our vehicles, the dogs came, there were 6 of them, most vicious looking things, and we shot every one of them. They were just the most vicious things I'd ever seen. And they had turned these dogs loose in between the fences in case any of the people tried to escape or something, these dogs would get them, and they were vicious. So we killed them, and as we jumped down off our vehicles and moved into this camp, and every time I tell this story, and I get to this point, I have a bit of a problem. Because I want to say these people, and yet these were not people. Zombies? No. Remnants of what people were. They came moving toward us, and we didn't know what to do. I myself was scared to death. Why was I scared? I wasn't scared of somebody grabbing me or something like that, because I could take care of that. But I looked at these people, and back in Holland, when we came in there to help the British, I was in a barn for 3 nights, among the hay and everything, and watching as an observation post for an artillery detachment. And I got lice. I got lice so bad they had to take me to a medic station and shave every bit of hair off my head, not a lot more hair then. My whole body, they just shaved me off, every bit of hair on my body, and use some kind of solution and so forth. So when I saw these people coming toward me and I saw what was going on, that first thing hit me, I'm going to get lice again. Little did I realize that that was nothing. The place was reeking with typhus and many other kinds of diseases. Well, no one had told us that there was such a place as a concentration camp. Oh, we had plenty of meetings behind the lines and so forth where they said, now if you take this girl out, you're going to get VD, and you got to use this and so forth and so on. There's prophylactics for this and that and so forth. I took prophylactics plenty of times. You know what I use them for? I used them to tie around my pants, tight around my boot. And that's what I use them for. And it was just the most unbelievable thing you could ever see. As these people were coming and they were grabbing us and Americana, one little man, he was probably 5 feet at the most. He probably weighed 50 pounds. He sidled up to me and there's a little hat in his hand, and he stood in front of me and he looked up at me and he said, "Seid ihr Amerikaner?" Jawohl, in German, which, are you American soldiers? So I looked at him, and not in German, but in Yiddish, which is a language that Jews of Eastern Europe spoke, and I speak it. I looked at him and I said, Jawohl, wir sind Amerikaner Soldaten und ich bin ein Yid. Yes, we're American soldiers and I'm a Jew. He grabbed my hand. Now visualize this. I'm 6'2", I'm 190 pounds. I've got a carbine in my hand with 60 shells in it. I got 3 grenades on my left. I got a pistol 45 here. I got my knife in my leg. And I'm standing there like this, and he grabs my hands over my carbine, and he says to me in Yiddish, "Was hat genommen so lang zu kommen?" What took you so long to get here? I've told this story 100 times or more. And every time I tell it, it tears me up. What do you say to someone who's enduring what he's endured? How do you tell him that you're just a soldier? You don't make the decisions. What do you say to that person? I looked at him and I said to him, "Weise mir, wo du lebst. Tell me where you live." So he took us to the bunks and showed us. In the meantime, on the ground, there are bodies strewn everywhere. Then I asked him what the stack was. He said, "That's a crematorium." They had 6 slots there where they had these steel sleds. They'd put bodies on and burn them. Piles of ashes, people. We blew that up with grenades and walked into one of the barracks. You may have seen pictures recently. Elie Wiesel died just recently. He was in one of those barracks. Who knew? People always say to me, "Did you meet Elie Wiesel?" He was a 15, 16-year-old kid. Who knew? Well, when I say that, I was 19, I think, then. But who knew? He was nobody. Nobody knew who he was. Anyway, we walked into this barrack that probably housed 500 people. But they housed them like bookshelves. There was like 18 or 20 inches. They slipped in there. There were no blankets or anything, some straw if they were lucky, and that's where they slept. And there was a big egg stove that wasn't burning, and the smell was so awful, it was so terrible. And again, I kept thinking of diseases, and so we were in there probably 30 seconds or so, and we backed out. And he showed us the railroad, which came up into the camp, and the name of the camp was Buchenwald, but this was a satellite camp of Buchenwald. Like most of the other camps, after a while they couldn't handle all the bodies and people they were sending there to murder, so they built sub-camps nearby, and this was one of the sub-camps. So we saw the box cars and the bodies in the cars and lying outside the cars, and the bodies all over the place, just everywhere. And suddenly one of my people hollers, "Down!" And every one of us hit the ground. Because, I don't know any of you have been in a combat unit in the infantry or so, but when somebody says down, you try to bury yourself in the ground. I turned and I said, "What's up? What do you see?" And he points to a pile of bodies, maybe 8 or 10 feet high, just bodies lying across each other. And he says, "Watch." And I looked and I could see the movement, but this little man who had come up to me, he was still with us, and he looks at me and he said to me in Yiddish, "Hab nicht kein Meure, seinen Ratzen was fressen dorten." Don't have any fear. There are rats who are eating in there, causing the bodies to move. So we got back on our feet. That night, we stayed in our vehicles and outside. I posted guards on the fence, but it didn't make any difference because many of the people were running out. They were going nearby farms. They were grabbing eggs, chickens, anything, and most of them were too weak to do even that. There was a large contingent of Russian prisoners there. There were children, there were women. There was a large contingent of gypsies, and each group wore a special emblem on their chest, on their clothes. And I used the term clothes, which is really it's a misnomer, because they were just rags, and most of them were barefoot. If somebody fell, dropped, they would immediately grab whatever shoes they had, whatever clothes, so the bodies are lying naked on the ground. And men, women, children, it was all the same. And I swore in that camp that if ever a person was in trouble and needed my help, I'd be there. And I've kept that promise. The next day, General Patton, by the way, that afternoon the Third Army did arrive, the tanks and everything, and a major in the medical corps threatened to court-martial me because I was killing people, he said. And I said, "I'm not killing people." He said, "Yes, you are. I told my guys to go bring a couple of jerry cans of water, and we're giving them water. I brought some boxes of K rations. We had these bars of chocolate and fruit, and we'd open some cans of omelets and so forth, and they'd eat it and they'd fall right in their face and die. They couldn't ingest anything. And he said, I said, look, I'm here with the 1st Division. I said, I'm not even supposed to be here. I said, I just found this place on a recon. And he said, stop feeding these people. Get out. We'll take over. I said, yes, sir. And they took over. Now, what they did is they made some kind of porridge, like a farina or something, and they spoon-fed the people who couldn't eat. And but the next day was the day that General Eisenhower, Patton, Bradley, and reporters, all of them came up there because it was the first concentration camp in Germany that was liberated. Most of the concentration camps were in Poland or Czechoslovakia, places like that, not in Germany proper. And that was where General Eisenhower made his famous statement. I want everybody that has a camera or journalist to make note of this, because sometime, somewhere in the future, some son of a bitch is going to say this never happened. And he was so right. He was so right. Well, the second day we left, we had to leave and rejoin our unit. And we rejoined our unit and we moved out. And about the 4th or 5th day, we took 2 German prisoners, soldiers. And I made a mistake again. I took 2 of the guys and said, take them back to a pen. Because when you're in a line unit, you can't take prisoners with you. What do you tie them up and drag them? So you send them back to a holding pen, stockade. And they were back in about a half an hour or so, and I said, where are the prisoners? They tried to escape, Sergeant, we shot them. Well, I knew it was a lie, but I was wrong because I had taken 2 of the 7 men who were with me in the camp and sent them, which I should never have done, because what we saw led us to kill anything that looked like a German soldier. That night, we took a German major prisoner. Well, if we took German officers prisoners, we would strip them to the waist. We'd make them raise their left arm. If we found 2 lightning bolts tattooed like this, we would shoot them. Now, I'm just telling you this because they want to do something to me, go ahead. At 93 years of age, I don't care. But we'd shoot them because we knew that they were SS troops. So we took this major, they brought him in front of me because, again, there was no officers, just me. And he stands in front of me, tall, brawny guy. And I looked at him and I said, do you understand English? And he said, jawohl. And I said, you're my prisoner. I said, my name is Master Sergeant Solomon Goldstein, I'm a Jew. And he looked at me and he went, poof! He spit right on my face, right down the left side of my cheek. And he said, verdammte jüdische Schweinhund. And before he could say another word, I don't know why, my right leg came up, my right hand went down, and the knife was in my hand, and I cut him from ear to ear. But before we threw him in the woods, we stripped him. And sure enough, there were the 2 lightning flashes under his left arm. I don't know whether I would have felt bad if they hadn't been there, but all these years when I tell this story, I think in terms of why did I do it? I sometimes rationalize and say I was afraid that if he escaped or something, he'd put me in that place where I was a couple days ago. And, or was it because of his comment about your dirty Jewish pig, or the fact he had spit on me? Whatever it was done. And one of my men said to me, hey, Sergeant, you didn't have to do that. You could have taken a rifle butt and just smashed him. And I looked at him and I said, you want to take his cause up? I reached down for my knife and he said, no, I was just saying, you could have hit him with a gun butt or something. And so, but from that day on, I was like just 3 of us, and I didn't want to talk to the rest of the men. There were 3 of us from the original company. And we ended in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. And a colonel said to me, "It's over, Sergeant." I said, "What's over?" He says, "Goldstein, you're going home tomorrow." I said, "What do you mean I'm going home tomorrow?" And you came home by virtue of points. You got so many points from months overseas. You got so many points for days of combat. Not enough points to come home right away. But even though you had these points, while the war was going on, you didn't come home. Like Vietnam War or over in Iraq, you do a tour of duty and then you come home for 30 days or whatever. That wasn't true in World War II. You were there until it was done. And he said, "The Germans have surrendered." And I said, "Really?" He said, "So tomorrow you pack up and go home." And I said, "I don't want to go home." I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Well, I'm going to Paris, and I'm setting up a transportation unit because we've got to collect as much as equipment we can and ship it to the Pacific." He said, "Now I want you to accept the commission and go with this." I said, No, because I knew if I went to the Pacific, I'd never survive. I don't know why, but I just felt it. So the third time they tried to commission me and I wouldn't accept it. And so I said, no, I want to go with you. He said, "What are you going to do with me?" I said, "I can type," and I just spur of the moment, I said, "I can type, I can use a typewriter," and I could. I learned to type in school, one of the things I learned. So anyway, I convinced him to take me. So we went to Paris and stayed in Paris for 7 months, 8 months after the war was over. You talk about heaven, this was it. And every week or so he'd say to me, "Go home." And finally my mom sent me a letter that I couldn't refuse and I came home. But I remembered my oath. And as we got on the ship and we were docking in Hoboken, New Jersey, and we're coming down the gangway, there were Red Cross people with little bottles of milk and donuts. Fabulous. But then I noticed down the other end of the ship there was a gangway and there were black troops coming off. Now, by the way, this 3rd Army tank battalion that came up were all African Americans. The first ones I'd seen in combat were in that group. So I looked and I see that these troops are coming off and nobody's down there with bottles of milk or anything. So I turned to one of them and I said, "Why aren't you serving these soldiers?" She said, "No, they're black." I said, "So what?" "Well, we're not supposed to give it to them." And I was furious. I got home, I stayed home for about a week and I said to my mother, I said, "Mom, I'm going to New York to visit Hank." He was one of my buddies. There were 3 of us. One died shortly before the end of the war. He was killed. Hank was my buddy and he was my best man at my wedding, which took place that year. And 3 weeks after we were married, he dropped dead of a coronary, 23 years old. 23 years old. I said, "I'm going to New York." She says, "Okay." So I went to Penn Station in Baltimore, and while I was waiting for my train, I had to go to John. So I go to the bathroom, and the guy says, "You can't go in there." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Look at the sign." I said, "What about it?" It says men's room. He said, "No, look above it." It said colored only. Now, I grew up in all this, but I'd forgotten it. And he said, "You can't go in there." So I became involved after that and helped form a group called the Blues, the Black Jewish Forum of Baltimore. And we did some great work. But then I became involved with the Israelis, and in 1980, 81, I forgot the date, I went to Israel and I joined up in General Sharon, Ariel Sharon, with the Israeli army and went up into Beirut, as far as Beirut, Lebanon. Then I came back to the States. 2 years after that, I got a call to go to Ethiopia. And I went to Ethiopia, spent 6 weeks there, and we brought out a lot of people. They were called Falasha in their language, which is Amharic, but they don't like to be called Falashans because Falasha is a pejorative term. It's like calling somebody a nasty name. Don't belong, you have no value, and so forth and so on. So but they want to be called Beta Yisrael, children of Israel, They all wanted to go to Jerusalem. And we got out thousands of them. I came back to the States. In the meantime, when all this, I was very involved in Soviet Jewry work. I made 6 trips to the Soviet Union, 2 to Russia. I remember one trip to the Soviet Union, and it was in March, and it was snowing terribly. We couldn't land in Moscow. So the plane was diverted to Leningrad, St. Petersburg now. It's called St. Petersburg. And I get off the plane and I go over to the customs, and of course there were only 60, 70 people on the plane, and there were probably 10 or 12 customs officers. So they had plenty of time to play with us. And I go up there and put your bag up, open the bag up. He looks at the clothes and he says, "These yours?" I said, "Yep." He says, "This box here is yours?" I said, "Yep." He said, "What do you do with these?" I said, "I wear them." He said, "These are women's clothes." I said, "I know." "Well, what?" I said, "In America, I'm known as a transvestite." So he looks at me, "What's transvestite?" I said, "Well, in the evening, I come back, I put my makeup on, I put on these clothes, and I turn music on, and I dance and so forth. Go in that room, strip me naked, and kept me for 2 days. Well, people walk back and forth, military. I guess they were looking to see what I looked like. Okay, packed up, let me go. I go to the Hermitage, and a young lady named Elena Keskuna, she was the counterpart of Sharansky in the movement, getting people out of the Soviet Union. She comes in, I told her the story, she completely dissolved. Had they looked closely, the clothes were size 2. Now, could I fit into a size 2? But these idiots, we called them Ivan Ivanovich. And they never even checked that. And she's about this big and skinny as an eel. And so that was one of the incidents. They kept me there. But there were a number of incidents with the Soviets. They played games with us, and we played games with them. But we did get a lot of people out of there until they finally opened up the gates of the country. I continued doing that. Married the most beautiful woman in the world. For 60 years we were married. As Yoni said, 3 wonderful sons and grandchildren, granddaughters, and so forth. And what am I going to do? I couldn't go back to school. The idea of going back to school scared me to death. And I just couldn't do that. So I knew 2 things. I knew how to fight. I knew how to drink. And so I bought a bar in Baltimore. I had some money saved up and I bought a bar. I did it for 13 years. Had one of the biggest bars in Baltimore City. One day, a man walked in, he says, "Hi, I'm with Gordon's Gin from England." I said, "Yes, what can I do for you?" He said, "Well, I'm curious. You people sell more Gordon Gin miniatures than any place in the United States. Why?" I said, "You see that road right there outside this building?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "That's Route 1. It goes from the south all the way up north." I said, "Tractor trailers stop here, and they buy 10, 15 cases of these. They pay me 25 cents a bottle, and they sell it for $1 a bottle in New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and so forth, because you can't buy them up there." He said, "Oh, that's clever." That's not clever, it's business. Then the guy who was the owner of National Bohemian Beer came in. "What's going on here?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You guys got a truck coming here every day dropping off beer. How's that possible?" I take him downstairs and I show him this pre-cooler, conveyor belts. I said, "Cases of beer there. We just bring them up, sell them. That's how we do it." And when I was 35 years old, I said, "This is it. I've had it." So I was having lunch with my wife and I said, "I'm finished. I can't take this anymore." So I sold the thing out. She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." So my insurance man called me and he said, "I want you to meet my boss, Ronald Cyril O'Connor, Pat O'Connor, 6'4", handsome guy." And he says, "Come on, sell insurance for me." I said, "I don't know anything about insurance." He said, "We'll teach you." So it's okay. So I went with him and I said, "Oh, who's going to teach me?" He said, "My son." So the son hands me an application and a rate card and he said, "That's it." I said, "What do you mean that's it?" He just go out and sign this and that's the way I went in the insurance business. For 47 years, I was in the insurance business. I made the $1 million round table every year. When I go to people in Baltimore, they say, "I thought you're in the liquor business. I thought you're in the real estate business." Nah, insurance. Couldn't sell a policy. So I get in my car and I drive to Washington, to Silver Springs, around Washington, D.C. And the first year I made the $1 million round table. It means you sell $1 million in insurance. And today it's nothing. But did that for 47 years. And here I am today at 93, still talking about it, thrilled to pieces to talk to people like yourselves. And I want to thank you for inviting me here, and if any of you have a question, I'll be happy to try and answer it. Thank you. Okay. Who's got the?
Here.
Okay.
If any of you have any questions, please let us know. Raise your hand. We'll get you a
You
microphone.
want to do this first?
I don't want microphone. Oh, you don't want microphone?
Okay, sorry.
Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask?
When I speak to schools and academies and what have you, and Naval Academy, et cetera, and the questions are fabulous. So I'm sure you've got some. Is that a hand out there? No, it's a head. Okay. Yes.
Yes, sir. I'm Technical Sergeant Parkins. My question is, did you have any real problems leading your men with, I guess, the insubordination or anything like that when the time really got tough?
Repeat that, would you please?
Yes, sir. Did you have any real problems with insubordination when the time got tough? And if you did, how did you deal with it, younger junior ranks?
Insubordination from my people?
Yes, sir.
Well, if I can handle it myself, I would. I never had a problem. Well, let's tell you real quick. We got a pass to London, and we went there. If any of you are fans of music or so, Glenn Miller, before he was killed or died in the airplane crash, he and his band were playing there, and 5 other fellows, myself, went to see it. And we went there, and we go in, and I see these women stand there in these uniforms, and I turned to one of the fellows and said, "Who are these women?" He said, "They're WACs." I said, "What's a WAC?" He said, Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. What are they doing here? He said, they're going to be working the post office and stuff like that to release men to go to the front. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I look and I see this one young lady, an African-American girl, and I walk over and I said, Bernice. She said, Sal. And we grabbed each other and hugged each other because she lived and knew where we lived, and I knew her. And the music started, and I loved to dance, and we danced the whole night through. On the way back to where we're staying for the night in London, we were about a block and a half from the theater, and suddenly it was like an air raid. Something hit me on the side of my head, and I went down in my side. I could feel the ribs crack, and I thought, man, I'm really I bought it now. And then finally I opened my eyes and looked. That's the first time I'd heard the name of this town, Plains, Georgia. This guy was from Plains, Georgia. And he called me everything but the Son of God. And because I danced with this gal and we were hugging and so forth. Anyway, during the invasion, I lost him. So I thought to myself, okay, he bought it and he got paid back for it. But I never really had problems where I had to, I did get rid of, if I remember, 2 guys they sent up. One was so scared that he couldn't function. The guy couldn't function. And finally I said to the colonel, I gotta get rid of this guy. Now I keep saying to you all, I said to the colonel, now between me and the colonel, there's a lieutenant, a captain, and major, and so forth and so on. But as I told you, I had a relationship with Colonel Pednall that I could bypass all of them because we had this kind of relationship. And so I said, I got to get rid of this guy. I can't keep him. He's going to kill somebody. And so we did get rid of him. We moved him out of our platoon. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
Staff Sergeant Parker. So the camp that you found, was it guarded? Like you said, there were gun points every 75 meters or so. Were there guards there too? What kind of contact did you experience leading up to actually liberating those prisoners?
What did we find leading up to it, the camp?
Yes, sir.
Well, it was just a beautiful countryside. It was lovely, and nobody ever imagined there was such a place. The people in the town of Weimar said, we never knew it was there. And every day they would take hundreds of these people who were working at quarries, which was close by, or in the forest. So that was not true. They knew. And you know, when the generals came up, Patton brought engineers up and had the equipment and dug out troughs like holes and brought the whole head of the city of Weimar up there, the mayor and everything else in their tuxes and their sashes and whatever, and had made them pick up the bodies and put them in there. And the soldiers, American soldiers, they pick up a body or just grab a hand and pull them. That soldier would take a butt of a rifle and smack them, because we insisted that they pick them up gently and lay them down gently. And that was Patton's idea. But we buried them, you know, mass graves. That's all you could do. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
Hi, sir. Jamie M. Parks, the historian for the week. You said that when you went to liberate the camp, there were the black tankers from 761st were there?
Yes.
Because I know it was a really contention with some people in media. They were saying that they were there, and other people were saying, no, you weren't. But
Oh no, oh no. We were all surprised and shocked because we had never seen. The only black soldiers I saw from the beginning were soldiers who manned the cables with the balloons that were used to, in case the fighter planes or so would come in, they would hit those steel lines and stuff. I saw them, and then the Red Ball Express, which was the truck drivers who were bringing stuff, you know, ammunition, food, and so forth up to the front.
yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sir, my question is, since you were younger and throughout your experiences and the years of experience you've had on this planet, do you feel that tolerance and equality is something that is getting better today, for example, than it was when you were younger? Are we headed in a positive direction from your viewpoint?
Well, if I get the drift of what you're saying is are things better today? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Things are better. I think they're a world away from what it was when I was a young boy. Completely different. I mean, I went to schools where no black children could come, or children of color. I played ball on teams where there were no black players. I went to high school where there were no black students. And when I went home, there were all black people around me, with my best friends. And we could not understand this except from the point of view that they were different. How were they different? Color-wise. Otherwise, you close your eyes, there was no difference. And so I see today a world of difference. I see a lot more respect for people. And I think we're growing up, where we're beginning to realize that this world wasn't made for just one group of people. It was made for everybody. And I think that the military now shows that more than probably any other group in the country. And I'm proud to say I served, and I'm proud to say that I probably had a little bit to do in our area with integration and with giving people the right to live like anybody else.
Sir, today there's a lot of controversy about people stating.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Today there's a lot of controversy about people stating that camps should have been bombed, that the American leadership knew about these camps. Did the ground troops in Europe catch wind of any of this prior to the camps being found? Do you know anything about it?
Did you hear that question? The knowledge about there being concentration camps, it was known to the higher ups. Did any of the soldiers know about it? Did we get word of it and so forth? I can only tell you my own experience, and I moved around quite a bit. We didn't know there was such a place. We knew the Jews are restricted in Europe. We knew about the ghettos, where they were confined to certain areas and so forth. But we didn't know that there were killer camps where they literally killed people, just, you know, burn them to death and asphyxiated them and so forth and so on. That we didn't know. I think it was purposely kept from us because, as I told you, once we had been there, there was no mercy. I mean, in Bastogne, we started there probably, because when word got around that 152 American soldiers had their hands wired behind them and then machine gunned to death in the snow, from that moment on, there was no mercy. But when we found the camp, it even it just emphasized more what we had been doing. And you know, toward the end of the war, you would come across troops, German troops, and they were like 13, 14, 15 years old, 60 years old, 70, 55. That's the range. You know, they could grab whatever they could find, and we'd shoot them. Like I said about the SS troops, today, if you're serving in Afghanistan or in Iraq or somewhere, and you did that, I'm sure they'd have you up in front of a court martial in no time flat. But this was a whole different thing. This was, I'm going to say, my war was a war of attrition, and it was a war of survival, frankly, because had we lost, had they broken through during the Bulge and taken Antwerp and cut off our supply line, that would have been the end. That would have been the end. The American soldiers would have been slaughtered. They would have taken England, and that would have been it. So we just, a lot of things we did was by instinct. Yes. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Rob Fleming, I'm the aircraft maintenance officer. 2 questions, easy ones. But you said you fought in the Battle of the Bulge, so everyone I've met from there says they've never been able to stay warm ever since. Is that a true statement?
Sandy, I'm sorry, I just...
So the men I've been privileged enough to meet that fought in the Bulge and fought in the Hurricane talk about how after that winter they were never able to stay warm again.
Yeah.
Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
You feel that way?
Yeah, yeah.
And secondly, did you and Patton really save the airborne, or did the airborne need your help?
Well, the airborne was a special thing. The airborne, frankly, we looked at them and said, these guys are crazy, because they did crazy things. And, you know, we were crazy too, but not like them. These guys were off the wall. They just did, they did stuff that I don't know what I would have done. And they had stuff that we didn't have. For example, I couldn't wait to get a pair of boots. You know, jump boots. I couldn't wait to, like I told you, I took that knife off of one of them, was killed, and things like that. But they were fighting fools. They were good. They were good at what they did, and we had great respect for them. But we also, just like the Air Force, with all due respects, in England, when you saw these guys with their crushed hat and with a pretty English gal on their arm and walking down the street, and so we'd say, they don't know what fighting, they're not soldiers. They're pretty boys, you know, and this was a feeling that existed with us. It was, you know, but it was fun. It was, looking back on it, I guess everything had its place. Everything had its place. I've seen guys cry their hearts out. When I enlisted my father, who had been a soldier in World War I, and my father had been in the French Army, American Army. In 1910-11, he was in the Italian Army fighting against Turkey. And so when I enlisted, he looked at me when I said, Dad, I'm leaving. He looked at me and he said to me, the first time that you hear a gun fired, you're going to piss in your pants. He almost got it right. He almost got it right. And so there were many things that happened that you know, you look back on it now. I can look back on it and talk to you all. The only probably two things that will always stay with me, apart from everything else. Because as I talk and so forth, other things come back to me that occurred. The two things is the situation with the camp, and when I stood there and swore what I would do. And the second thing was that major. And that haunts me to this day. I don't know why, but I've talked to psychologists and so forth, not professionally, but just talked to them and told them, and they said, forget it. Forget it. You did what you had to do, that's all. So that's fine for them to say it, but I did it. That's the thing. This hand did it. And, you know, and so anyway, but that's the way we lived. Yes, sir.
Senior Balthazar, after having seen and done everything you have, you went on to own a successful business and have several other successful careers. Wondering what helped you the most transition from soldier to civilian?
Did you all hear that? After the war was over, I went into a couple of businesses, well, about 4 to be exact, and what helped me transition and so forth. I think one of the things was respect for people. I learned to respect people. I learned that just because I was lucky, and they called me Lucky Saul, didn't give me the right to look down on anybody. Also, I realized throughout my whole life that that I'm no better than anybody else. I'm lucky, and if you give everybody an opportunity that was given to me, unfortunately, I never used the Bill of Rights, the Veterans Bill of Rights. Whether it was a mistake or not, I don't know, but I did all right without it. I think being in the military, I think coming out and knowing how to survive and knowing how to take care of myself and those around me, whether I liked them or didn't like them, help them. And I've always been that way. I've always been ready to shake a hand with somebody. I've always been willing to say, good to meet you, and if I can help you in any way, let me know. And that's been what I've done all my life.
We got time for one more question.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this already. Maybe I missed it. But being of a Jewish descent, I don't know if that's by father or mother or both. And how were you aware of everything that was going on at your age, that was going on in that country, coming face to face with all of that? Did that impact you enlisting into the Army at all? Or was that stuff never told to you by your parents of what was going on?
The question is, did I enlist in the Army because I knew it was going on and so forth? Let me just say to you that my father and mother had a business where they supplied ships. Not big, it was very mediocre, and I couldn't get a new pair of shoes whenever I wanted, and I couldn't buy a jacket if I wanted to, and so forth. But be that as it may, I was reading books when I was 3 years old. And I would go to the library and read everything I could put my hands on. And so as I went to school, I was bored, frankly, all through school, because I felt I knew everything that they were going to talk about, which is almost true. But I also was interested in what was happening in the world. So I had a little radio, as I said, and I listened to what was going on. I listened to his father Coughlin, and I read some newspaper articles and so forth in the library, and I saw that what was happening, that Jews were being put in ghettos, and yes, that did have a big influence on me enlisting in the Army. I didn't know to what extent the problem was as far as Hitler and Jews, but I did know that my people were being persecuted and so forth, and that did have something to do with it, because as I said, as a child, walking back and forth to school, being exposed to anti-Semitism, I felt, well, fighting my way back to school, I'll get out where I can fight on a big scale. So yes, it did have something to do. Thank you so much. I'm most appreciative for being invited here, and good luck to all of you. You dropped your ball.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Everybody, please take a seat if you could. So many attributes, Mr. Goldstein, that I think a lot of that are very common to what we leaders talk about, that we want to imbue in our airmen, our soldiers, our sailors, our Marines, our coasties, whoever it is, our civilians, that we want to imbue, that I see in you and that I see in your story. Just amazing. Whether it's a warrior, a proactive leader, using your critical thinking to get you through those unplanned moments in war, that's amazing. The moral, ethical dilemmas, those are not the same ones that we see today, obviously. But war is very unscripted. There's always a plan for it, but I'm sure that anybody who has talked to somebody who's been in conflict knows that that's just the plan that you're going to deviate from. And so, again, thank you for sharing those moral, ethical dilemmas. And as you said, war then was different than war in the Pacific even. And war in the Pacific and in World War II is different than the conflict that we face today. So, the fact that you can share such personally touching stories about the prisoner of war asking you what the heck took you so long, it's pretty amazing. If I were you, I would have given a smart aleck answer that said, well, I had a few people to go through to get here, but I've been thinking about you for a long time, because just hearing you talk, I know that's exactly what was motivating you, whether it was that one individual person or not. And so I think what I take away from this most of all is something that we emphasize today, and it's called dignity and respect. And that's what motivated you, not only to get through World War II, but it's obviously still driving you today. And I would posit to everybody out there in the audience that if you take a proactive leadership approach and whatever it is that you stand for, whatever cause that it is, look at the impact that one man, one person can have. World War II, following through Normandy, Bastogne, liberating people from Buchenwald, taking up causes back home in the United States, making that soldier to civilian transition, 3 amazing sons, innumerable grandchildren. You're motivating a heck of a lot of people, and you're a fine, outstanding example of all of the organizations that are represented here today. So on behalf of the 87th Air Base Wing, the 305th Air Mobility Wing, the 621st Contingency Response Wing, I'm not sure where our Army brethren are from other than Fort Dix, but they do a heck of a lot of Army training here, getting our reservists ready to go to war. On behalf of all these outstanding Americans, thank you very much.